Hi everybody, welcome to my session SQL Server 1922 on containers and Kubernetes in years 22. My name is David Itshak, DBA. This is my previous lecture. So about me, over 24 years of experience with SQL Server Wacker Sybase. I'm also application and infrastructure DBA for national NoSQL solution like MongoDB and Redis. Hadoop Clever Administrator, specialist in high availability ERP solution, doing security, high performance computing application, Oracle SQL Server, Power BI as a service. 3 degrees from teaching on Israel Institute of Technology, BSc, MBA, ME. I presented in Oracle Open World, Oracle OLG, also in SQL Server Forum, Microsoft BI Forum, SQL Saturday, Data Saturday, Power BI Camps, Group by DBCC, past global, and also one of the past global Evo virtual group managers. So this is about me. This is my previous lectures. You can see a lot of lectures. The recommended books and sample for these sessions is SQL Server DBA Guides to Docker Container from A Press, SQL Server 19 Reverse from A Press, SQL Server Big Data Cluster from apress.com, Pro SQL Server 19 Administration, SQL Server on Kubernetes. This is from Apress also. I use all these books for this demo and for these sessions. I like these books. I like that people write them more very smart. Also, these courses from plural sites, supporting SQL servers on Blitz Kubernetes, building a Microsoft SQL Server big clusters. So let's start. If you want to deal with Docker container on your Windows, you should install PowerShell latest versions. So from this link, you should download PowerShell Win x64 MSI and install it like this. Then you should download and install the sample database. The sample database can be installed from these links, Wildwood Important and AdventureWorks. You can restore this sample database on Windows, Linux containers, and Kubernetes. After you should install SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. If you install SQL Server Management Studio latest versions, you also install by default Azure Data Studio latest editions. So this is the screenshots. So let's talk about the term. What is Docker? Docker is a program that works with container. It's a name of company, brand. It's a brand name. It's wrong term for container because container is container. What is the image? Read-only template for an application. This is the image. Docker registries store all the Docker images, container, and instance of running template of the image. Windows container which have OS, operating system of Windows. Linux container, a container that uses Linux subsystem. Why should we use container? Container are very portable because they are very light. We can run anywhere where Docker can run. They are very light because they need reduced disk, CPU, and memory footprint, not like a word server. They are consistent. Why? Because we have all the same image of SQL Server scripts and tool. They are efficient because we will see that they have faster deployment. They reduce the patching. We'll see how you can patch container, less downtime, and also we have CI/CDs, continuous integration, continuous development. Everybody uses Dockers. In SQL Server container, the bin libs represent the minimum binaries required to run SQL Server. We need the Docker software to run and manage the container. I told you the Docker is the name of the brand. Containers are very light because they do not talk directly to the OS and the OS. You can see it here. You can see there's this operating system. These are the containers of SQL Server. The minimum binary required is bin libs. We can see that there is persistent storage. We'll talk about it. So what is image? Image is a read-only template with instruction for the Docker container. This is a template. You can create your own image, or you can create image used by other registry. To create the image, we need the Docker file. The instructions are in the Docker file. Image, this is a snapshot of set of files required to run application. Often the image is based on another image. For example, it's based on specific OS. So SQL Server image is based on Ubuntu, Red Hat, or Windows. Windows is deprecated now. There is no SQL Server container which run on Windows subsystem. It's very portable and consistent. What is container? I told you it's runtime instance of an image. You can run it, you can take this image or template and run it as many times as you like to use the same image. It's isolated but it can communicate outside the container. By default, it has access to all the CPU and memory resources. We will see how you can limit it. Each container has its own writable layer on the top, but it shares read-only image layer. So all the container have read-only layers, and up on the container we have writable layer. You can start and stop container, and it does not affect the writable layer because when the container continue to run, it run from the same point. There is volume. Volume provides persistence on the host, where you can keep the data, and it'll be persistent. So we have containers with Windows container and Linux container. Containers are empirical and cannot keep data because you start container, you start the process performs mission, the process finish, the process terminate, and the container stop. So database is the ultimate solution not to keep in container because container has no persistency and because of performance. What is the Docker ecosystem, the Docker engines? So here you can see it. You have server. This is the server. In the server, you have Docker, which is a persist process that manages the container. Okay. You have the command line interface. Here, the client, the Docker command, Docker build, Docker bool, Docker run. You have the REST API. Everybody talking with everybody with the REST API. You have the registry, where all the images of Docker are being stored. So Docker daemon, it's Docker D, it's service in Windows, you can see it here. It's listening for Docker API requests and manage Docker objects such image, container, networks, and volume. It can also communicate with other daemons to manage Docker service. You can see it here. Docker client, and this is the service in Windows. Docker client, execute command and send it to the Docker daemon like SSMS like SQL Server Management Studio for analogs for DBA. Run Docker command. How do you run Docker command? In Windows, it's in PowerShell, Linux, in the bash. Okay, the shell. Client can communicate with more than one daemon. So this is the client. This is the server of the Docker. Docker registry, you can see it here. Store the Docker images. Docker Hub is public registry that anyone can use. So Docker is configured to look for specific image on the hub. You can run your own private registry here. You can create your own private registry. Docker push command, take the image and push it to the registry. What is the container lifecycle? Build, push, pull, run. So build, Docker build command to build a new container image using Dockerfile. You can use Dockerfile to build a new image. This is the link to the commands. The syntax of Dockerfile is here. Push, you can publish container image registry with Docker push command. So this is the link to the documentation. Pull, you can pull container image from using the Docker pull command. Run, to run a container both an image, use the Docker run command. So this is it. So you use the Docker client to manage and monitor and interact with the container. Build, push, pull, run. What are available edition of Docker? So this is Docker Desktop, which can run on Mac, Windows 10. This is the Community Edition. It can run on Linux Flavor. It can run on Azure. There is Legacy Docker Toolbox. Docker Enterprise Edition can run on Windows Server, all the flavor of Linux, and Docker Enterprise Edition for Azure. What are the installation choices? We can install Docker on Ubuntu Center Linux Server, or Windows Windows 10 Enterprise Pro Education with Edge built-in Hyper-V, and you should enable Hyper-V on Windows 10. You can see it. On the Windows Server 16.19.22 server, there are some installation info, but we can run only Windows container on Windows Server. So If you go to the Docker site, you can download Docker Desktop. You have the flavor of personal, pro, team, and business. Note that its community edition is not free. Why? Because it's not free. The license terms have been changed. So this is the best choice for development. Docker Desktop for Windows. So you should install Docker Desktop for Windows. You go to these links. And first you have to install WSL backend. What is WSL backend? It's Windows Subsystem for Linux. It substitutes you for the Hyper-V emulation which was on Windows. So the Windows Subsystem for Linux developer, you can run your Linux, including most command group like utilities and applications, directly on Windows without overhead of traditional virtual machine or setup. It means that you can install your flavor of Linux on your machine and interact with this on Windows. So you can see it here. So how do you install WSL? Very simple. You go to the PowerShell and run WSL -- install. So the above command will install WSL. After you've done it, you can install your flavor of Linux subsystem. Here we install Ubuntu. So WSL -1 install -d Ubuntu. It means install Ubuntu on WSL on Windows 10. You can change the password, WSL-u root. And this is how you change the password of your WSL on your Windows. What are the basic WSL command for WSL? WSL- install, WSL install -1 distribution and distribution name, WSL -list -1 is online, list all available Linux distribution that you can install with WSL. So if you go to these links, you can have links on getting started with database on Windows Subsystem Linux. So it's amazing, but we can install MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL Server, SQLite, MongoDB, Redis on your WSA. And the question is whether it's an alternative to Docker. Why? Because Docker now costs money. It's not free. You should look at the commercial license stream. So if you install WSL, you can install all those database system on your Windows, on your WSL. So this is the basic command for WSL. WSL -list -us online. Show you all the distribution of Linux which are available with WSL. WSL -install -d -ubuntu will install Ubuntu flavor on your machine. After we install WSL, you can install Docker Desktop on Windows. You go to these links. If you have problem with the installations because installation failed, for example, for elevated privilege, you should go first. You should clean the previous installation, and then you should go to these links and download from the latest version of Docker Desktop to previous version until it works. I see it on my computer because I have problems with installations. With the latest version, it didn't work because of this error message, failed elevated privilege, and then I go to this link and install previous versions. So you should double click on Docker install setup and run. When prompt, it showed that use WSL instead of Hyper-V. Again, you don't use to have an emulation of Hyper-V on your desktop. You should check here that install required Windows component for WSL2. Docker Desktop use WSL as infrastructure instead of Hyper-V. Option on your Windows. So let's start with the demo. The demo is good for also for the new version of SQL Server 22 and 1.9. So the demo is also good because SQL Server 22 is in beta version and the license is evaluations. I didn't use it, but the same demo is good for this version. So let's install SQL Server 19 on Linux. So you should download and install. If you have problem with your Docker machine, you should download CC Cleaner and clean the installation and install again a previous version of Docker Desktop. First, let's run Docker run hello world. You see it here. Docker run hello world is the same as Docker run hello world latest. If you run this, it will download an Linux image which will say hello world from Docker, and then it will disappear. You can see the result here. What is tag? Tag further identify the content of Docker engine. So we can see we've seen in the previous that Docker run hello world is by default the same as Docker run hello world latest. So the tip, always specify tag, because you don't know, you will never know what latest image you will get from the public container registry. If you refer to Microsoft Container Registry MSR, and by default the Docker Hub, Docker Registry have pointer to Microsoft Container Registry, you can pull the latest version of SQL Server as follows: Docker pull MCR Microsoft Core MS SQL Server, and here the tag latest. Let's explore the Docker app. If you run this command, invoke web request http MCR Microsoft VT blah 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 content, you will get a list of available tags from the repository. So you can see it here. If you run this command, you will see all the images which are available in Microsoft Registry. On Bash Linux, the same should be cal-sl http, and this is the command. How do you look for SQL Server container on Docker app? You run the command docker search MSSQL, and this is the result here. Docker image command. Docker image command for each image output show the image repository, tag image, identify the image ID, and creation then and image size. So if we run Docker image, the creation then, by the way, is the date on which the image was created, not pulled. You can see it here. The image name, the image tag, the image ID, where it has been created, not pulled, the size. You can see all the information here. But sometimes you have same images with same images here, but different tag. In this case, you will get this error that if you will try two Docker images, you have two images with the same name, but with different tag, with the same image ID. You can see that they have the same image ID. If you try to delete this image, Docker image RM, this is the image ID, will get an error. Error response from daemon conflict, unable to delete blah blah blah, must be false. In this case, you can delete it with the -f option. So Docker RMI, if you will, Docker RMI -f, Docker image -q will return all the ID of all the available image as an input to Docker RMI -f. -f, it means false. After you run this command, the image will be deleted. In this case, we have same images ID, but with a multiple tag. So when a new container image is public into repository, it will have a new unique container image ID. Repository admin should update latest tag to point in the newest image in repository. So repository admin should update the tag so it will be unique. Docker ps, this is a command, show the currently running container. The status command tells you whether the container is currently running. You can see it here, status. If container you just run doesn't appear in this list and you didn't get error message, it means that you run it deleted mission, then terminated. Docker ps -a will display all the container, both currently running and those that were terminated. You can see it here, Docker ps -a. You can filter the Dockers using -f. Docker ps -e -f status created will filter all the containers which have been created. Docker ps -a -f status running all the containers which are running. So you can see it here. Docker ps -a -f status running will show all the running container because we have filter on running. You can see it created, static running, and this is the port. So We are going to our desktop and we want to stop running container, remove a container and image, so will be empty send. Everything will be clean. So you cannot delete running container. First you have to delete, you have to stop it, and then delete it. So to stop and delete container at the same time, you can use the command docker rm-f, but it's not recommended because it's the same like kill command in Linux, which brutally terminate the SQL server. So how you delete an image? Docker image rm and then is the list of the image ID, or docker image rm and then the image name. So you cannot delete an image when it's used by a running container. So again, you must stop and delete on the container using it before you can delete the image. So you can see it here, Docker images. Docker images minus Q will give the ID of all the images which are available. Docker RMI, and here Docker image minus Q, and this means that it will be an input to Docker RMI, and this will delete all the images which are available. So how do you stop running container and remove container and its image? For example, let's run a container. We'll talk about the syntax later. Confirm that it's running docker ps -a, docker container ls -a, docker images show the images, and then docker stop, and this is the name of the container, SQL Server 19 latest, docker rm SQL Server 19 latest, this is the name of the container, docker ps show the container which are running, docker images show the images, docker images rm in, remove this image. So we can see it here that here we run the container, then docker ps show that this is running container, and this docker container ls-a show in more format way the image which is running. Docker images show the image which was pulled when we run the container. Docker stop, and this is the container name, SQL Server 19 latest. Docker rm SQL Server latest. Docker ps show that there are no running container. Docker images show us all the available image which now was pulled when we run the container. Docker image rm, and this is the image name. Docker images show that there are no images. How, with one line, we can stop and remove all the Docker container and unused volumes are external file system outside the container for persistency. There is a trick. So if you use -l all or -a, it will show all the container. Default show just by default it show the running, so all the containers which terminated run, etc., etc. Docker container ls-n will show us the container in a format way, in pretty way. So Docker container ls-a minus format tables dot name dot dot image dot status dot port will show the container, the name, the image, the status, and the port. How do we get the container ID? So docker ps -a -q will give us all the IDs of all the container. So if we run docker ps -a -q, and here with braces we'll put it will run docker stop and docker ps -a -q, it means that take all the container ID and put it as an input to docker stop. Docker rm, docker ps -a -q, again, take all the container ID and give him to docker rm, docker remove as an input. Docker ps will show all the container. Docker volume prune -f, it means remove all unused local volume which are referenced by any container. How we delete images? So docker images list all the available images. Docker images -q delete show us all the available images. Remove all images, docker rmi, docker images -q. It means get the image as an input to the docker rmi, docker images q, and remove them. Docker volume prone -f will remove all unused local volumes. Now we show how you stop the running container, remove container and images. Very simple. Sorry. Docker ps -a -q in braces to docker stop. This will give all the idea for the running container to Docker stop. Docker ps minus a minus q in braces to Docker rm. This will remove all the running container. Docker images minus q will show all the images ID on our machine. In braces, the ID, and this is input to Docker RMI, which means remove images. Docker ps show all the container, which were terminated, running, etc., etc. Docker images show all the images, and then Docker volume pro minus f. You can see here how it's working. Docker inspect. What is Docker inspect? You have the Docker images and Docker inspect image ID. If you want to know the version of which SQL server the images run, you should run the command docker inspect image ID. Why? Because we have JSON text and we have label for the version number of SQL server. So you can see it here. Docker images and then docker inspect, and this is the image ID which is taken from here. And the label you can under the section label you can see that we have it is Microsoft SQL Server, and this is a version 1.5.0 blah blah blah, vendor Microsoft. So docker manifest inspect and docker inspect command function differently. If you want to explore the manifest list, we'll see it later, or image manifest, we should use the docker manifest. To explore lower level detail of Docker objects, such image or container, we should use docker inspect, like here, to check the version of SQL Server. What is context digest? When you run docker pull, you can see it here, docker pull or docker run command, context digest is included as a part of the return command. So if you run docker pull and the image, blah blah blah, it's downloaded the image files, and then you can see the digest, sha, blah 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 blah, a lot of sha. Once and only, Docker demos returns the hash and verify that this is the context digest of the file system layer, the same as one defined in the image manifest. What is the meaning? If you run docker inspect and then the image ID, under this second repo digest, you will see that there is a digest here. This should be equal to the hash that was returned with the command docker pull, the same. Why? Because it guarantees the integrity and the authenticity of the file system. So you can see it here. So there is 5 layers of SQL Server on Linux image. You can see it here. Docker inspect MCR Microsoft.com SQL Server 19 latest. Underlay, we should see all the file system. What is distribution hash? We are working across the network, and there is configuration of the file system implemented to improve the network bandwidth and storage space. The hash layer section, when you run the docker inspect command of the image, is the uncompressed hash. You can see it here, is the uncompressed hash. Distribution hash is the digest field of the image manifest of the compressed file system. So comparing the digest value for SQL Server or Linux image layer. So docker manifest inspect MCR Microsoft MSSQL latest. This is one command, and there is the docker inspect MCR Microsoft MSSQL Server. So this, you can see it here, that this is the hash of the layer of the uncompressed layer, but here you can see the hash of the compressed layer of the file system. Here you can see it here. So this is distribution hash. How you can see the distribution hash? Using docker manifest inspect. If you run docker inspect and the image name, you will see only the hash of the uncompressed file system. So what is image manifest? Image manifest is a file manifest. It provides detail of different file system layer. So with the same image manifest, you can build configuration for different file system. So image manifest tells the Docker daemon how to run the container. Manifest list is fat manifest because it contains lists of image manifests for different platforms. It provides seamless user experience for multi-architecture supports in the same image manifest. So you don't have to worry about finding the correct image, the name and tag combination. So one example, I can run Docker run a load for different OS and CPU, Windows, Ubuntu, Mac OS, and different architecture, and all the time I will get the same the image which run Docker allow. Why? Because there is the image manifest. By the way, SQL Server do not support manifest list. It only support x64 compatibility only for SQL 17 and higher. By the way, Azure SQL Edge is a small print edge optimized SQL database engine with built-in AI support. It has manifest lists. Let's see. So how do you identify manifest list? So media type should be application VD Docker distribution manifest list v2 JSON schema version 2. So if you run Docker manifest inspect hello world, this is fat manifest which support all the S in the same manifest. We can see that it supports different OS, Linux, AMD, Windows, Linux on ARM. So how do you can know it? Because if you run Docker manifest inspect hello world, you see that media type is APB version blah 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 v2 JSON. So this indicates that it is a fat manifest. If you go to media type here, you can see that this is the context deepest of Linux or ARM image because it contains different it contains a description for different OS system. Sorry. So you can see the context different on the of Linux. You can see it, architecture ARM OS Linux. Azure SQL Edge has fat manifest. How do I know? Because Docker manifest inspect MCR Microsoft.com Azure SQL Edge latest. So you can see that media type is for fat manifest. And you have the constant Ziget for AMD 64 Linux and Linux or ARM. You can see it here. So this is the fat manifest support two flavors of Linux. So if Docker daemon doesn't have the local copy of a hello world container image, it says Docker hub for the image. If a fat manifest exists, Docker hub search. So if there is a fat manifest for example, Docker hello world, Docker hub search, go to the section of the Docker daemon platform information and redirect the query to the corresponding image manifest. We can see in manifest we have description of different operating system and architecture. What it has first, it reading the corresponding file system layer required to build the image. So, for example, if it will window, it will go to image manifest, go to the section of window, and download all the images which are appropriate for this container. Once downloaded complete, the Docker daemon create and run new container based on a hello world image. So you can see it here. Here we will see how you can save MSK Linux Docker image on a file on Docker desktop. So, Docker images RM. This is remove the previous images of SQL Server 19 and 22. Docker pull MCR.com, MSQL Server 22 latest. Docker images, and then Docker save -o, and this is the path where to save the image. And this is the image name. You can take this image to a computer which is connected from the network and run Docker load -access and minus input, and this is the path to the Docker. Why should we download the image to the local disk? Because it saves download time. You can copy the image to another host disconnected from network and load it. This is optional. So always save the image on local disk and load it. You can see it here. You can see it here. After running the command, I save here the image here, the local disk. Docker images. This is the image. So SQL Server or Linux image with image layers. Each pulls complete message. You can see it here, which represent a file system layer that makes up the entire image. So each pull, you can see it here. There's a file system. There are 64 characters represented by short 1-2 digit X. So each layers they have each ID, which is X. What is union file system? So containers are simply read-write file system layer that sits on the top. You can see it here of the image. The image itself contains of a lot of layers which are read-only. So container image is read only. When container is running data and you want to write to the data, it creates its unique writable layer. How do you do it? You do copy and write HNICO. Thus, we can enable a lot of container from the same single image. So, unified system take different file system and create a single unified file system. From Docker point of view, we have only one image. When a container is deleted, the writable layer is also deleted. So, in Linux implemented by storage driver, which is Linux overlay 2. So you can see it here. File directories and names. Each file system layers that pull from the Docker Hub is stored on the Docker host local file system. You see a lot of images. The location of file system layers is in the local disk on the storage driver. So on Linux, you can find all these layers using Docker info and then grep-wd storage driver. You can see it here. The result is varlib docker overlay 2 there. Okay. On Windows Server 161922, you should run this command docker info select string storage drive. This in PowerShell. You will get this result Windows filter. On Windows Docker Desktop, this is located on C program data Docker Windows filter. But if you want this command, you can see it here. This is the layers. You can get results like warning, no backy loss, throttle redux. So if you have these matches when you run docker info select string storage driver on Windows Desktop, if you run docker info, for example, you can see and have these matches. It's okay, because if you go to this link in Stack Overflow, it tells us that you can ignore it. And if you run docker info or docker info select string storage driver, you will get the location of this where in the Docker store all the files it pulled from the Docker Hub. So the Docker file system with database. So Docker works like images on top of each layer. Its database, SQL Server engine dependencies, and base of its images. So the top layer, so this is the container with the images, which are read-only. You can create a lot of container from the same image. The top layer, the modifying data in container, happen in the read-write layers, this. In this way, you can write a lot of container from the same image. So when there is a write operation is requested, file system driver find what the layer defined is in. If the layer is not on the top of the container, the unified system will perform copy on operation to copy from the div directory. We talk about the directory where it put all the file system and copy it to the container to the top layer. So to the div directory of the container. Once the file has been copied, the change then performed. This can take a lot of time. So subsequent changes made to do the file will be written to the div directory of the read-write layer. So all the changes will be read here. Unlike SQL Server, when you copy database to database snapshot when record is modified, Docker copies the entire file system. It doesn't keep the block that has changed. So it's sufficient when we're working with large write-intensive processes as RDBMS. So the moral lesson is that the read-write layer is not efficient and good for database because it's copy all the entire file system. It's not like database snapshots. So let's show you how you can run SQL Server Linux image on container. Note that SQL Server on Windows image container is not supported anymore by Microsoft. You have only SQL Server on Linux image in production. So Docker PS, Docker stop mean stop, delete the container volume. Docker RM mean remove the image, remove the container. Docker volume ls show the volume. Docker volume RM SQL volume remove the volume. Docker volume ls show the volumes. Now the magic is happening. Docker run -c accept ULA, -c SA password, and this is a password, memory is a memory, -t 14331433, -name, this is Docker name, minus host name. This is the host name, is the same like container name. Minus mount source SQL volume target var PTMS SQL. Minus D MCR Microsoft call MSSPL server SQL server latest. Docker PS check that the container is running and the volume was created. Docker container ls minus a format. This is show you in ND format where the container is running. Table name, table image, table status, table port. Docker volume ls, Docker volume inspect SQL volume. So let's pass on each checksum. You can see it here how it's run. So let's pass on each parameter. So what is minus C? Minus C parameter specify the environment variable that the container need to execute. At minimum, we have the ULA agreement and SNSA password. You can see it here. Minus C except ULA. Why? Other environment variable you can see that in SQL Server Edition you have a lot of environment variables. You can refer to this link. You can enable, for example, the SQL Server Agent. Options, instead of running minus C and then parameter, you can run the command with minus env minus file and then give the path to the file where all the environment variables are included instead of minus C. So if you want to build Linux image, you can go to these links. You can see there are a lot of environment variables. Okay, MSQL engine enabled, MSQL support, PID, etc., etc. Minus P, minus 430T, minus 433, it means publish the container TCP port to the host using the format IP and host port container port. So it allows you to connect to SQL Server instance in the container from a remote client, mapping port 1433 on the host port 143 on the container. So we map the port 14333 on the container to the port 1433, which is the default port of an SQL Server, to SQL Server. Note that if you have more than one SQL Server, you should map another port of SQL Server 14333 to another port on the same server. Why? Because we cannot run an empty instance of SQL Server on Linux on the same machine. Minus name SQL Server latest. It's not required, but it's convenient. You can easily identify a container by name and manage it. So we give the container a name. Minus host name SQL Server latest. This is the host name. For convenient, we give the same name for the host like of the container, the same name. If you run strudel as server name, it will be the host name. So it's very important. This is the port. We talk about named instance and default instance. Node and instance of SQL Server. This is the name of container. This is the name of the host. Minus start and let's stop its magic. Why? It starts container automatically. It means that when your operating system starts, automatically SQL Server will run. Okay, so Docker recommends that you use restart policies with Docker and not use external processes. Minus D means run the container in the background. Run the container in the background. So it's very convenient because you can start a container and configure it always to restart unless it's explicitly stop or restart it. So it's been running in the background. If you have problem error message, you should remove this minus D. Okay, because the default behavior is to dump the content of the error log to the str minus D, and then you run your SQL Server container. So another bank check is to remove this parameter if you cannot start SQL Server container. If you do this, you will see next. All the output will be to the SQL Server will dump the content of the error log to the std out, and you will show the error message. You can use also docker log command to dump the error log of SQL Server container. Minus mount source SQL volume specify that the volume used to map to SQL Server directory. So it's mean very simple. It's mean take the default directory of SQL Server, var opt MSQL data, and put it in external S to the container on the file system. Why? Because containers are not persistent. So it will be kept out of the container. Another option is to use -v CMSSQL var opt MSQL data, which means map this to c.mssql. Both parameters create the directory on the Docker host in case it does already exist. Should we use -v or mount? The -v parameter came in first. -v parameter was used in standalone container, and the mount parameter was used in service in Docker Swarm. So -1 parameter system is easier to understand and exhibits use of key and value pairs. So use -mount. You can go to these links and see the options. So can we share the volume between container? Volume cannot be shared between SQL Server container. Why? Because if you start a new container and attach it to existing volume that another SQL Server container already exists, you will get an error 17113, because SQL Server process has exclusive lock on the system database. So both SQL Server cannot hold the same volume and cannot system database. So this is the example. You will run the same SQL Server on the same volume, and if you run docker log, and this is the idea of the container, you get this error message, error 17113. Error is access. What is docker exec command? Docker exec command with the -i interactive and -t terminal parameter, we can process to execute command in the bin bash shell of the Linux operating system. For example, if you run -s -exf, it will list all the processes of the container. In SQL Server container, we have only two processes: SQL Server processes and bash shell and ps command. This highlights the selection that container has runtime. It doesn't have a lot of processes. If you go to Linux service system and run ps-exf, you will see a lot of processes, but in SQL Server, you have only two processes. Container and its running process cannot see the other process running on the base operating system. The default directory of SQL Server is var opt MSQL data. ls-l, this is the path. So you can see the example here. Docker ps, docker container, ls-a, -format table, name, image, status format. This is a pretty format of the container which is running using Go template. Go, it's a language to create servers. You can see the format here. Docker exec -it SQL, and this is the name of the container. Bash mean go interactively to bash shell. pwd show the current directory. ls var opt MSQL show the default directory of SQL Server. ps-exf show the process which were running on SQL Server. Hostname show the host name, which we gave when we created the Docker SQL Server latest. Exit. We can view the hostname within the container without getting into the bash using docker exec SQL Server latest, which is the name of the hostname, and then hostname. You can see it here. We did it into the bash. List the processes, docker exec SQL Server latest, ps-aux. You can see the processes. You can see that we have processes from SSQL. We have only very few processes here. So you can see it here. You can see docker exec command here. By default, the container has no resource constraints. How do you do a resource constraint on SQL Server? We want to limit the memory and the CPU. So how do you do it at runtime? You can use, when you run SQL Server, you can run it with the parameter -m or -memory equal to 0.48. This is the maximum amount of memory that the container can use. -1 CPU, it means how much of the available CPU resources the container can use. How do you check the status of the resources of the SQL Server? Docker stat. How do you set at runtime the CPU that Docker can use? Docker update, this is the name of the container. -1 CPU, to mean use only 2 core. You can see it here, Docker stat, Docker update, SQL Server latest, -1 CPU 2. How do you copy file to the container? So You want to copy the database backup into container directory var ptmsql data inside SQL Server latest container. By default, the permission from SQL Server 19 and forwards, the permission of the copied backup are for non-root SQL Server container. So SQL Server process, but SQL Server process inside SQL Server run as MSSQL. So you have to copy the backup and then change the permission to MSSQL. Why? Because there's a security issue and the file permission is not of SQL Server. So how do you do it? You are using the churn command. Change the ownership of the backup file to the user MSSQL. So docker cp hostpass container id container path will copy the file. So docker cp, this is the path to our backup. See backup, so I will report it full backup. SQL Server latest is in F container and container path var opt MSSQL data. This is the path. This is the path. This is the path to default directory backup of SQL Server. Docker exec -u root SQL Server latest mean connect as root. Churn MSSQL var opt MSSQL var wild full backup mean change the ownership of this backup file which was copied to MSSQL. Docker exec it SQL Server latest bash mean go to the bash. Now check the permission. ls -la var opt MSSQL wild importer full backup. If I run this, I see that the permission has been changed to MSSQL. And then exit. So again, permission by default is not of MSSQL. If you copy the file, you have to change the permission from SQL Server 19 and forward, also SQL Server 22. How do you restore backup with SMS? You simply go to SMS, connect to localhost with the SE and the password we gave it, and then put the path to the device with its var opt MSSQL data wild importer, and then restore it. You don't have to be DBA to type commands. Of course, how do you copy file out of the container? Docker cp, this is the name of the container, this is the path, and then this is the path on the Windows. So docker cp SQL Server latest var opt MSSQL log will copy all the directory log where all the log of the trace file of SQL Server resides to see the Docker on your machine. You can see it here. How do you explore the container logs? You can use spread log or Docker log to explore the SQL Server log. Docker log is much better. Why? Than running spread log when troubleshoot SQL Server related issue. Since I can see exactly what is going on while it's happening. Spread log simply read the error log of SQL Server. You can filter, for example, exec spread log 10 login fail will filter all the failed login. Docker log example, it's better. Why? Docker ps -a, because it gives you -f parameter will give you the SQL Server logs in real time. So Docker ps -a, Docker log container -f, Docker logs container ID -f, for example, Docker ps -a, Docker logs log SQL Server container -f will give you the log of the SQL Server in real time. You can see it here. For example, if you run SQL Server Linux and the password was not enough complex, it will not run. So SQL Server Linux container password complex policy terminate the container. It's create an entry in SQL Server log. So you can see it here. You run SQL Server and then run Docker log to explore it. You can see it here. Why? Because the password was not complex. Docker log is a container name. Here another example here. Networking with standalone containers. You can use the default bridge network. If it's not container, you can use the default bridge network. It's not the best choice for production system. You can create your user-defined bridge network, which create your own custom bridge network to connect container running on the same Docker host recommended for standalone container running in productions. By default, Docker create a pair of virtual network. You can see it here. Every time container is started, one on the end of which is attached to it via the bridge network. You can see it here. And the other to the running container. So this is the bridge. Network diagram. The default bridge network access the Docker 0 on Linux. You can see here that there is Docker 0 Linux or NH internal Linux on Windows. Docker effect bridge network forward traffic between the network attached to the base or MAC address of the host. Of the top of the Docker 0 bridge, you can see it here, we can implement our network drive, depending on Docker host operating system. So let's see example, Docker networking for SQL Server DBA. Docker network ls will show the network. Let's run another container with on the default bridge network. So Docker run minus name SQL Server latest one, or minus sort SQL latest one, and here we map default port 143.2.1.4.1.0, minus c accept ULA SA password, minus d MCR Microsoft latest. We should check that the container are running. Docker container ls minus format table name image status port. Viewport mapping Docker port SQL Server latest Docker port SQL latest 1. Get the IP address of the container. Docker inspect SQL Server latest minus format network's IP address. Docker inspect SQL latest 1 minus format IP address. Inspect the default bridge network. Docker network inspect bridge. So you can see the example here. You can see that when you run here, you run another container. We can see that Docker port SQL Server latest will tell you that this is 1433 is the port on the container. If you run Docker port latest, we can see that 1401. Docker inspect SQL latest minus format network IP address will give you the IP address. Docker inspect SQL latest 1 minus format network server will give you the IP address of this Docker. Docker network ls will give you all the running container, all that happened on the local container. Docker network inspect bridge will give you what is happening default network. So this is network for DBA, very, very simple. How do you do Smart SQL Server 19? I don't have too much time, but this is the latest in place upgrade. A great benefit of keeping system use database in the same location on fast updating of SQL Server instance. Instead of installing SQL Server update, how about switching computer when new version of SQL Server? Downgrade is not supported. So if it's, let's do it and it'll be more clear. Docker PS, Docker stop SQL Server latest 1, Docker run SQL Server task, Docker volume ls, Docker volume rm SQL volume, Docker volume ls. Docker invoke web request HTTP Microsoft MCR content, and now we'll pull SQL Server 19 but CU8 on Ubuntu. Docker pull MCR Microsoft CU8. Docker images is pulled down, and then we will run this image. Docker minus c accept, minus c set password, minus p port 143.143, minus me SQL Server latest, hostname SQL Server latest, minus 1 source SQL volume, target var PTM SQL. It means that the data of this SQL Server will be on external volume, and var PTM SQL will be mapped to SQL volume minus d running background. Know that this is not the latest version. This is SQL Server CU8. Now I can connect to this SQL Server, and when I run SQL through server name version, you can see that this is SQL Server latest and Microsoft SQL Server 19 CU8. Now, how do I in place migrate? I don't have to patch this because I have to stop the SQL Server latest and then run another container on the same volume. So you can see it here, docker minus restart and let's stop except ULA. Let's say password 123 minus SQL Server latest minus host name minus mount source SQL volume target var OPTM SQL. So I run another container on the same volume which SQL Server latest before use it. Now the name of the container is SQL Server latest 1, and I pull the latest version of SQL Server. Now I'll try to connect and tell us, just a minute, SQL Server is in upgrade process. Once the upgrade was done, I can connect to this SQL Server and then run server name and SQLBB. You can see that server name and version and SQLBB. You can see that SQL Server was upgraded. If you have created database in SQL Server, it will be kept. It will be kept. It will be kept, and this database was upgraded. So this is in place upgrade. You don't have to patch it. You simply change between version of container with latest version of container to the same volume. So this is smart SQL Server in-place upgrade. So again, we create a volume SQL volume. We charge a default direct to SQL Server Linux, which is var ptms SQL. We stop and remove the existing server Linux container. And var ptms is have data directory which contains the system database, log file database, and transaction log files. Log directory contain the SQL Server error log file, the default trace file, and default extended event session. Secret is directory contains master key that is generated by SQL Server instance. During the creation of SQL Server Linux container, the content of our ptms directory get copied to the container as part of the setup process. Because we are telling process to map to our ptms directory inside the container SQL volume. So this is same as I saw you. We map different version of container to the same volume. How to create? I will run because I have a few minutes. How to create custom Docker images? You can use the Docker commit command. You can run a running container and use the Docker commit command to create a new image that include the change in DBs in those container. Docker images, Docker ps1sa, Docker commit, and this is the version. SQL with DBs. Docker inspect. Docker inspect, you can see it here. But there is problem with this because the commit operation will not include any data in the volume mount inside the container. So there is no persistency. The database will not keep. So how do you create your custom images? You should use Dockerfile. Dockerfile, it's Dockerfile reference, you can see it here. The SQL Server Dockerfile images, how to create the Dockerfile, you can see in these links. You can create your custom SQL Server Linux container image. So from Ubuntu or Red Hat based image, label Microsoft label version, export 143, copy, run, and CMD. So from command specify the base size image SQL Server container is built on. So you can create your images based on other images which created other images for a system. Label means the metadata like version of SQL Server. Export command allow the SQL Server container of program to connect port 1433, which is inside the connector. This is the default of SQL Server. Often this port will port to another port in the host, so we can run several SQL Server containers on the same host. Copy and run command are just build a process to copy all the binaries files into image file system and install the software dependencies of SQL Server. CMD statement indicate the Docker the name of the program to run when the content is started up. So I have another 7 minutes and one. If you configure the Docker daemon, you have two options. You can run Docker daemon with flags to tell you when to run. You can use domain.json configuration file. It's working with Docker-D. So Docker-D, you have available flags. For example, if you want to do experimental version, you can run sudo docker minus experimental on Linux. On Windows, it's only Docker-D minus experimental. So domain.json file content configuration setting for a Docker daemon. By default, it doesn't exist. So on Linux, it's only C Docker directory. In Windows, it's C program data Docker config. First, you should backup daemon.json before any changes. Now I can show you how you change the default image and content directory for on Windows. So the default root directory is var pt linux dog overlay on Linux. On Windows, it's C program data Docker Windows filter. So all the image you pulled from Docker Hub together with content file will be restored in these directories. You can change this. Why? Because if the disk is full and you want to change Docker, so you should change to evaluate the Windows directory like cmd Docker. Notice that we have two black backslash because of the Go language. It's just language of the servers. We should stop the Docker service. Copy and paste C program Docker to the empty Docker and reuse all the image to avoid pulling again. And then we should start the Docker service. We should verify the Docker info command and pulling the image. Let's see it pulling more. Docker info select the string dir. The output is Docker root dir C program.docker. Then stop service Docker will stop the Docker. Then we should copy all the new all this directory to the new directory and then start service Docker. Docker info select string dir will show that The new directory is cmd docker. Docker pull hello world will put it in mnt docker. If you run ls mnt docker, you can see it here. Docker info, select string dir, it's C program Docker. We stop the service. You go to C program Docker image Windows to C program data Docker config, create demo.json file if not exist or backup, and then write it data root cmd docker. Stop the Docker, copy all data from to the new directory. You can see it here. And then start Docker, start service Docker, Docker info select string dir. This dir has been changed. Docker pull hello world will pull hello world to this directory, and then if run ls-mnt docker, you can see that this is the new directory. We can return back to the directory if we change, do the same trick. So it's more than 1 hour, and I think we should leave SQL Server Kubernetes to another lecture because it's more than 1 hour for lectures. So to summarize, Docker is a fantastic way to build your own virtual's own virtual box to play with SQL Server or the version without installation. You can put it on stick and move to another computer. Docker on Windows is not supported anymore. Docker on desktop is good for CI/CDs and fast development. I do not know if it's good for development for deployment with a lot of data, terabytes data, but it's good for ICDs, local for computers. I think that on another lecture we'll talk about SQL Server Kubernetes and whether I should use it or use Windows failover cluster. So I will say bye bye. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thank you.